We've been working a lot with this person class, and I said we were going to get the basic idea of a class down, how to declare a class, how to create objects of that class type, and then we're going to slowly over the next couple of lessons start to change, modify, and improve our classes. And here's the first step we're going to take to do that. When we have declared methods, and we've declared variables here in our class. I have just told you, go ahead and use this public keyword here before you declare a variable, and use a public keyword here before you declare a method. Just go ahead and use it and trust me. All right. Here, what I'd like to do is try to explain a little bit about what we're doing here and give you another option that you can use when declaring instance variables and declaring methods for your classes. All right, so let's take a look. What we're talking about here and what we're doing with this public and private options you have here is we actually would like to control variable scope. And I'll talk about variables right now, but it also applies to methods. The other day, we talked a little bit about variable scope. Where can the variable be accessed? Well, in this case, we're actually going to use two keywords, public and private, and we call them access modifiers. We can determine in a class the variables or the methods. Where can they be accessed? Okay. When you declare something as public, like we've done in the person class we've played with so far, the variables and the methods can be used by another class. We are giving another class direct permission to access the variables that we declared inside of the person class. I'll show you an example in a second, but it's the reason why in the main program, we've been able to write something like p1.movies equals 5, because the movies variable was declared as a public variable. Meaning that even though movies sits over here in the movies in the person class, the main program can still touch those variables directly. Okay. Now I'll tell you that usually we will define the class itself, and methods will typically be defined as public. I'll switch back to my code here for a second. So here we have declared the print person method to be a public method. Again, meaning that in person test, we are allowed to call print person from person test. I'll come over here. The reason we are allowed to do this, p1.printPerson, is because the print person method is a public method. The reason why over here we're allowed to assign a value to p1.books, the books variable, is because books has been declared as a public variable. Okay, so not a whole lot of change from what we've done so far, right? But at this point, it's going to be expected that we will include this access modifier keyword in front of the names of all the variables we declare and in front of the names of the methods. Okay. So the other option you have is the private access modifier. If you declare something as a private method or variable, that method or variable is not accessible outside of the class definition. So the only time you could use, let's say, a private variable is within the class itself. You would not be able to use it directly from the main program. Typically, we actually kind of like this. And what we will usually do is we will, in fact, declare all of the instance variables in our classes to be private variables. Right? It's just good form to do that. So in reality, we're going to get in the habit now of declaring all of our variables as private and all of our methods as public. right? So some good form that we're going to take here. Okay. So private methods and variables can only be called within the class itself. Right? And I'll show you an example of that here in a moment. All right. So this idea of an access modifier, if all we do is stick public or private before the declaration of a variable or the declaration of a method, we can control, is that variable or is that method available inside or outside of the class. And here's an example. The textbook goes back to your dog class that we had started talking about. Okay. So I have here a couple of the variables, and I've now modified them so that the name variable is a public variable and the breed and age variables are private. And get age in human years, this method is also a public method. Right? Imagine now in the main program, you have these sets of code and this set of variable declarations in there. Okay, so if we looked at this, buddy.getAge in human years, would we be able to actually call that? And the answer is yes, because this is a public method. So in the main program, you would in fact have access to that method call. However, buddy.age, buddy.breed, both of those were declared in the class as private variables. So you would not be able to actually do those calls. You wouldn't be able to actually access those variables directly from the class, from the main program itself. You would be blocked, and this would cause an error and would basically say that you do not have access to those variables. Okay. So this is actually kind of a good security thing. We like the fact that we get to control as the programmer who has access to the data in our program. Right? And if I want to give someone access to the data in the program, well, I will make sure they only have access to what I want them to have access to. Okay. And if you almost kind of think about it in terms of, again, that objects represent real world things, well, if you think about it for a dog, right, is it possible that you could go in there and change the dog's name? Sure. Your little cousin named your dog Buddy, and you hate that name. So later on, we could train the dog to now respond to Fido, right? We could do that. But is it possible in the middle to change the dog's breed? No, it's not. The breed got assigned when the dog was made, or in this case, when the dog object was created. I don't want anyone to have access to the breed variable. We can't make the dog any younger. We can't make the dog any older. So I would want to restrict someone's access to the age variable by declaring it as private. So when you really kind of think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Not only is it good form in a program, but it makes a lot of sense even if you think about variables here in a real world context.